Trump's response to Stellantis' threat is paving the way for a significant confrontation. Serious concerns regarding loyalty, economics, and survival have been raised by the automaker's decision to shift its focus overseas in response to declining sales and changing priorities. Trump's irascible reaction is making matters worse. However, what made Stellantis take this chance? What effects will this have on American industries and jobs? Stellantis, and what impact will this have on you? Let's dissect everything. What's going on? Not only did Stellantis make a choice, but they also started a debate that has changed the way people talk about American business. A former president with a reputation for using harsh language is not someone that many businesses would dare to take on, but Stellantis did. Stellantis boldly criticized Trump's America First policies, calling them outmoded in a world that is rapidly becoming more globalized. Their statement raised concerns about the sustainability of putting domestic production first in a sector that values efficiency and innovation. The timing was purposeful. The announcement followed widespread layoffs at their Warren truck assembly plant, where a restructuring effort resulted in the elimination of thousands of jobs. Stellantis contended that in order to remain competitive, they needed to think globally, even though Trump's policies sought to preserve jobs domestically. The economics of contemporary manufacturing served as the foundation for the automaker's argument. For instance, producing EVs necessitates sourcing rare materials and building at scale, both of which call for international operations. For Stellantis, this was a matter of survival rather than treachery. But this choice felt very personal to the workers and their communities. Once representing stability, factories now served as hollow reminders of unfulfilled promises. Trump saw this as the ideal time to draw attention to the problems with globalization and mobilize support for his protectionist policies. The action paved the way for a political and corporate conflict with broad ramifications. However, what prompted Stellantis to take this chance, and what would Trump say? Trump's reaction was not only anticipated but also explosive, and it increased the stakes in what was rapidly turning into an ideological conflict. Trump retaliated with his trademark ferocity when Stellantis struck. This was a declaration of economic principles rather than merely a verbal sparring match. Trump responded with vigor and promptness. He branded Stellantis' actions as corporate greed masquerading as strategy and accused them of deserting American workers. His remedy? Tariffs on businesses that outsource production that can reach 200%. The former president's speech served as a rallying cry for an America First agenda. In addition to being about Stellantis, he presented a striking image of American workers being deceived by companies seeking profits overseas at rallies and in media appearances. His story struck a chord in industrial communities most affected by factory closures and layoffs. Trump's strategy wasn't without its detractors. His tariffs, according to his detractors, might lead to trade disputes and increase consumer costs. However, this was a matter of principles for his supporters. They saw Trump as a champion of the underappreciated worker who opposed corporate abuse. But Stellantis refused to back down. The business maintained that the harsh realities of a cutthroat market served as the foundation for their choices. For them, surviving required making difficult decisions they felt Trump's policies fell short on. This back and forth was about the essence of American industry, not just policy. Trump and Stellantis were engaged in a conflict over how to define manufacturing's future. As the conflict intensified, attention turned to the people who were most impacted, the employees and their communities, who took the brunt of these profound changes. The effects of layoffs. This was more than just business for the workers at Stellantis factories. It was a complete upheaval of their lives. Layoffs are individual accounts of hardship, not just statistics. Thousands of workers at the Warren truck assembly plant were abruptly laid off. These jobs were more than just a source of income for many. They were a way of life and a way for them to give their families stability. The repercussions were disastrous and happened instantly. Customers for nearby companies that relied on factory workers fell precipitously. As revenue dried up, restaurants, grocery stores, and even daycare facilities found it difficult to survive. Enrollment in schools was dropping, and once thriving neighborhoods started to plateau. The emotional cost was equally high. Families struggled with uncertainty, parents were concerned about paying their mortgages, and kids' schooling was disrupted. In addition to being a financial setback, the layoffs caused a rift in these communities' social cohesion. Trump took advantage of this narrative to attack Stellantis by emphasizing the individual accounts of those impacted. He used the story of an auto worker who lost everything as a metaphor for what he referred to as the failure of globalization when he spoke at rallies. The layoffs were presented by Stellantis as a necessary evil. The company claimed they were forced to make cuts because EV sales were finding it difficult to take off and production costs were increasing. Their global strategy left immediate destruction in its wake, but promised long-term survival. Not only was the fallout economic, but it was also emotional and social, causing a rift that both Trump and Stellantis attempted to bridge. This gap paved the way for a more in-depth discussion about whether businesses should put profit ahead of the community, and what happens when they do. The conflict of values. This was a fight for the future of industry itself, not just for jobs or tariffs. Can patriotism and profit coexist? A fundamental tension in contemporary capitalism was revealed by Stellantis' method. The obligation to assist local communities was on one side, while the demand for worldwide efficiency and innovation was on the other. Protecting American workers at all costs was Trump's obvious solution. His suggested tariffs were symbolic acts of defiance against globalization, rather than merely economic measures. These tariffs were seen by his supporters as a return to justice and a means of leveling the playing field for American businesses. But according to Stellantis, things had changed. The manufacturing of EVs necessitated intricate supply chains that crossed several continents. They asserted that upholding America First policies would hinder innovation in addition to harming their bottom line. This conflict of ideologies wasn't limited to political rallies or boardrooms. Workers found themselves caught in the crossfire as it played out in their lives. While factory closures resulted in lower wages, tariffs ran the risk of raising consumer prices, which put many families in a precarious situation. Both sides were criticized during the heated discussion. Trump's tariffs were viewed as being unduly basic and disregarding the complexity of contemporary manufacturing. Stellantis, on the other hand, was charged with forsaking their heritage and putting shareholders ahead of stakeholders. This was a referendum on the future of globalization and its effects on people's daily lives, not just a dispute between a politician and a corporation. The stakes are extremely high, and it became evident as the story progressed that this was only the start of a much bigger conflict. Stellantis explains its choice. Stellantis remained steadfast despite growing criticism. They made it very evident that their goal was survival, not treachery. Stellantis intensified their approach as the criticism mounted and issued a thorough statement outlining their justifications. They maintained that electrification, automation, and competition were causing previously unheard-of change in the global automotive market, which had reached a turning point. Stellantis had no choice but to adapt. It was a need. The business cited its recent forays into markets like Egypt and Mexico as calculated steps to ensure sustained growth. It was not only about reducing expenses when producing cars like the Jeep Grand Cherokee L in Egypt, it was also about expanding their global reach and breaking into new markets. Stellantis asserted that they were establishing themselves as a robust global player that could withstand economic shocks by decentralizing production. However, detractors quickly retaliated. Stellantis was accused by labor unions of using the rhetoric of innovation to defend worker-harming cost-cutting measures. They maintained that the company's actions were motivated more by immediate financial gain than by long-term planning. This storyline aligned well with Trump supporters' larger criticism of globalization. During rallies, Trump urged his supporters to boycott Stellantis, calling the company's actions a betrayal of American workers. Those who felt left behind by decades of economic change found great resonance in his message. Stellantis' audacious defense only served to widen the gulf and draw attention to the action's wider ramifications for the world auto industry. It became impossible to overlook the strain on local economies and workers as Stellantis struggled to defend its approach. The human price of globalization. Every business choice has a human backstory. The effects were disastrous for the employees of Stellantis plants. It was impossible to ignore the human cost of globalization in places like Warren, Michigan, where Stellantis had laid off thousands of workers. The abrupt layoffs were devastating for families who depended on consistent paychecks from the Warren truck assembly plant. Many of these employees had worked at Stellantis for decades, developing a sense of identity and purpose around their positions. They lost stability in addition to their income as a result of the layoffs. Retirees feared they would have to take money out of their savings for their golden years, and parents worried about how they would pay for their kids' education. The repercussions went beyond specific households. Revenue from nearby companies that benefited from Stellantis employees' business fell precipitously. Once crowded with lunchtime patrons, the dining room was now deserted. As families left to pursue other opportunities, schools struggled with declining funding. There was a sense of collective loss as these communities' social fabrics started to deteriorate. For those who were still working, the uncertainty was just as agonizing. Employees at the Toledo assembly complex were always afraid of losing their jobs next. Every shift was clouded by the constant threat of temporary production halts. even as they clocked in each day. The human cost of Stellantis' choices highlighted the conflict's larger stakes and sharply highlighted the consequences of globalization. Trump's promise of a new future became a ray of hope for many workers as they struggled with their new reality. Trump's retaliation strategy. Trump presented a plan that was both audacious and divisive in response to Stellantis' global aspirations. Trump presented his plan for reviving American industry during a rally in Michigan. His plan was centered on high tariffs, intended to penalize firms such as Stellantis for outsourcing work. Trump maintained that these tariffs would level the playing field and compel automakers to put American workers first and reevaluate their international strategies. The possible drawbacks were immediately brought to light by critics. An economist cautioned that tariffs might trigger trade disputes, raising consumer prices and upsetting supply chains. The additional cost of operating for automakers may be transferred to consumers, raising the overall cost of cars. Trump's followers, however, had a different perspective. They believed that values were more important than economics. Tariffs were an attempt to restore systemic justice and a protest against what they saw as corporate greed. Trump also promised to review trade agreements, claiming that the US-Mexico-Canada agreement and others did not go far enough in safeguarding American jobs. Renegotiating agreements to put domestic production first, even if it meant upsetting people overseas, was part of his future vision. The debate gained new impetus from Trump's audacious plan, which increased the stakes for Stellantis and other automakers negotiating this unstable environment. However, Stellantis was already getting ready for the difficulties that lay ahead as Trump's rhetoric grew more heated, determined to stay on course. Stellantis gets ready for combat. Trump increased the pressure, but Stellantis had no intention of giving in. The business prepared for what looked to be a bumpy journey ahead. In order to weather the storm, Stellantis started putting backup plans into action. Although executives were aware that Trump's tariffs might cause supply chain disruptions and reduce profits, they still thought their global strategy would win out in the end. Diversifying its network of suppliers was one of Stellantis' main strategies. Using the knowledge gained from the pandemic, the business looked into forming alliances with vendors outside of areas where tariffs are common. This flexibility turned into a pillar of their strategy, enabling them to reduce risks and maintain efficient production. Additionally, the car maker increased its efforts to attract customers with its next generation of hybrid and electric cars. Models like the Jeep Grand Cherokee PHEV and the Ram EV were marketed as game changers because they combined cutting-edge technology with useful features. Stellantis hoped that by implementing these innovations, the controversy would be lessened and its standing as an innovative brand would be strengthened. However, the difficulties weren't limited to the outside. There was increasing dissension among Stellantis' employees on the inside. While workers called for more openness about their future, union leaders criticized the company for putting international growth ahead of local stability. Stellantis responded by starting a public relations campaign to regain confidence. They presented a picture of a business dedicated to advancement by highlighting their investments in new technologies and sustainable manufacturing. Even though Stellantis' readiness demonstrated its fortitude, the way forward was far from clear. The stakes were still rising, and the fight against Trump was far from over. The emphasis shifted to the wider ramifications for the sector and beyond, as the conflict between political pressure and corporate ambition reached a breaking point. The ideological conflict. Trump versus Stellantis is not merely a business dispute, it is an ideological conflict with significant implications for America's future. Stellantis, a multinational company that promotes innovation and globalization, is on one side of the dispute. According to Stellantis, there is only one marketplace in the world, and success depends on adjusting to its constantly shifting dynamics. It is argued that shifting production to countries like Egypt and Mexico is a necessary development in a sector characterized by extremely narrow profit margins and intense competition. Trump, on the other hand, is an advocate of economic nationalism that places a higher priority on American industries and workers. His America First rhetoric, which portrays businesses like Stellantis as villains in a story of betrayal, resonates with people who feel left behind by globalization. Deeper issues regarding the place of corporations in society are raised by this ideological conflict. Do companies have an obligation to the communities in which they operate? or should they put profit and shareholder value first? Trump supporters contend that businesses like Stellantis abandon the very people who created their brands when they outsource jobs. The argument is more practical for Stellantis. They maintain that investing in new technologies, staying competitive, and eventually providing customers with better products are all made possible by globalization. They caution that ignoring international markets could lead to decreased innovation, increased expenses, and stagnation. This ideological conflict is not only influencing Stellantis' future, it is also a microcosm of the larger economic discussions that will characterize the 21st century. The effects on local communities and regular consumers are becoming more and more apparent as these high-level discussions continue. The effect of economic ripples. Every choice made in a corporate boardroom has an impact on the economy, and Stellantis' actions are no different. Local economies have already been impacted by the layoffs at Stellantis plants, but those effects could be amplified tenfold by the possible fallout from Trump's proposed tariffs. Fewer employees translate into fewer clients for small companies in industrial towns. Daycare facilities, hardware stores, and restaurants in the area are already struggling. Some are barely surviving. The effect on customers comes next. All prices may increase if tariffs are placed on automakers importing vehicles or parts. Even cars built in the US are dependent on international supply chains, with parts coming from nations like China and Mexico. A single tariff might raise the price of everything from windshields to brake pads, increasing the cost of both new cars and repairs. These communities' real estate markets are also struggling. Fewer families can afford to purchase homes as a result of fewer steady jobs. Local governments find it difficult to pay for public services and schools as property values drop, and municipal tax revenues decrease. The impact on the economy extends beyond the boundaries of the factories and permeates every area of the impacted communities. These domino effects demonstrate how intertwined contemporary economies are, and how one policy has the power to upend entire communities. Stellantis is placing a large wager on a daring plan to change its reputation and direction in the face of economic uncertainty. Stellantis' electrification gamble. Stellantis is relying on one word to secure its future amidst the controversy: electrification. Stellantis is strongly relying on electric vehicles as a means of moving forward at a pivotal moment in the auto industry. The company's recent announcements regarding all-electric vehicles, such as the Jeep Grand Cherokee PHEV and Ram EV, demonstrate its unwavering dedication to innovation. Stellantis is placing a wager that these cars will revitalize their brand, drawing in eco-aware customers and securing their place in the future. However, the stakes are very high. With competitors like Tesla, Ford, and General Motors already making headlines, the EV market is getting more and more competitive. Stellantis requires a story in addition to new models in order to stand out. Targeting customers who wish to go green without sacrificing features like towing capacity or range, they are promoting their EVs as the ideal fusion of sustainability and usefulness. There are still difficulties. The possibility of forfeiting the $7,500 EV tax credit is a serious concern. Without this incentive, Stellantis' electric products might become less affordable, which would make them more difficult to compete with. Although the company is actively lobbying to keep the credit, the outcome is still up in the air. If Stellantis' risk is successful, it might signal a sea change for the business and demonstrate that creativity and financial success can coexist. Trump's constant pressure is making the industry face difficult realities about its past and present, while Stellantis concentrates on the future. Trump's threat to the sector. Trump's venomous rhetoric is a wake-up call for the whole auto industry, not just Stellantis. Trump has long criticized automakers for outsourcing jobs, but his recent emphasis on Stellantis has raised questions about industry practices. Although the viability of his suggested tariffs and trade deal renegotiation is hotly contested, the goal is to compel businesses to prioritize domestic production. The intricacy of contemporary supply chains is one of the main obstacles. For stable production and low costs, automakers depend on a global network of suppliers. Relocating everything to the US is not only costly, but logistically challenging as well. Concerns regarding Trump's plans' effects on consumers are also raised. Although his tariffs are intended to safeguard American jobs, they may result in higher prices for consumers and a possible market contraction. Critics contend that by making cars more expensive for working families, the strategy may harm the very people it is intended to assist. Nonetheless, Trump's followers think his firm approach is required. They view his tariffs as a means of bringing jobs back to America and holding companies responsible. They believe that the long-term benefit of revitalized communities and industries outweighs the short-term suffering caused by higher prices. Trump's challenge has made the auto industry reevaluate its goals, paving the way for a confrontation that may change how manufacturing is done in the future. Everyone is watching Stellantis' next actions and the wider economic ramifications as this conflict intensifies. The strategic pivot of Stellantis is changing their approach for the future, rather than merely responding to Trump's pressure. Stellantis is changing its direction in response to growing criticism and international difficulties. The company's executives have alluded to daring strategies to regain market share, emphasizing two key areas: innovation and cost-effectiveness. Stellantis is looking into ways to reduce production costs without compromising quality in order to address cost concerns, rethinking their supply chain, negotiating with international suppliers, and implementing cutting-edge manufacturing technologies like automation are all part of this. The goal of these adjustments is to lower overhead while preserving their competitive advantage. In terms of innovation, Stellantis is intensifying its efforts to electrify. The company is making significant investments in battery technology in addition to their upcoming EV models, with the goal of developing more durable and reasonably priced alternatives. In an effort to draw in tech-savvy customers, they are also creating cutting-edge driver assistance systems to compete with market leaders. But there are serious risks associated with these initiatives. Traditional clients may become irate if they move too quickly, and their reputation may suffer if they break their promises. Stellantis must strike a delicate balance between long-term growth and short-term survival. Their strategic shift is a daring attempt to reinterpret what it means to be a global automaker, not just a matter of survival. Stellantis focuses on itself, but the industry as a whole is preparing for a dramatic change brought on by shifting consumer demands and political pressures. The growing pains of the industry, the auto industry, is being rocked to its foundation by the conflict between nationalism and globalization. The automotive industry has long served as a gauge of political and economic developments, and the current unrest is no different. Businesses are battling a quickly shifting environment where geopolitical tensions, environmental issues, and consumer demand converge. Automakers are being forced to innovate at a never-before-seen rate as a result of consumer demands for more environmentally friendly options. At the same time, businesses are being forced to reevaluate their international strategies as a result of political figures like Trump pressuring the industry to prioritize domestic production. The stakes are extremely high for Stellantis and others. The market is changing as a result of the proliferation of electric cars, the drive toward driverless technology, and consumer demand for affordability. Businesses that resist change run the risk of falling behind, but those that welcome it could usher in a new era of mobility. However, the way forward is far from straightforward. Additional layers of complexity are introduced by changing trade policies, fluctuating tariffs, and supply chain disruptions. Automakers have to overcome these obstacles while maintaining their brand identities and providing customers with value. The industry's growth challenges are an indication of change and pave the way for an exciting but uncertain future. After everything is said and done, attention turns to what this means for the communities that depend on the auto industry as well as for employees and customers. The price of change to humans. The lives of thousands of workers and their families are at the center of every corporate decision and factory closure. It is impossible to overestimate the human impact of Stellantis' actions and the larger changes in the industry. Layoffs have an impact on local businesses, schools, and social services, in addition to the people who lose their jobs. Uncertainty disrupts plans and dreams, and is a continual source of stress for families. It's not easy to strike balance between standing up for employees working automakers to develop creative solutions. These tales serve as a reminder: every change in the economy has a profoundly personal cost, emphasizing the need for thoughtful and caring solutions. The question of who will spearhead the movement going forward. What cost stands as the industry change?